Welcome to Sounds of Resistance YouTube channel. The cards are being redistributed in the war between Russia and Ukraine. The Russian army has suffered many casualties since the beginning of the invasion. The Russian forces seemed to be the strong side at the beginning of this tension, but it turned out that they were not. The incredible defense of the Ukrainian army almost disappeared the Russians. The Russians encountered a stronger Ukraine than they expected. Thus, Putin's easy invasion plan did not work out either. Russian leader Vladimir Putin caused almost the entire Russian army to be destroyed because of his unsuccessful plan. Like what happened in the Kherson and Donbas events, the remaining Russian soldiers chose to surrender en masse. When Putin learned that Russian soldiers surrendered in addition to the military ammunition he lost, he went crazy. After the soldiers he lost, Putin is trying to find soldiers for the Russian army again. Putin, who forcibly recruited every healthy man in his country into army, was not satisfied with this. Putin, now devastated, is forcing soldiers with chronic health problems to war. A news in the British media has given all the details about this issue. We will now pass them on to you. British defense experts believe that while many Russian soldiers were forced to serve in Ukraine due to serious health problems, those first to take cover under fire likely suffered particularly heavy casualties. According to the UK Ministry of Defense, a number of common themes emerge in the experiences of Moscow's mobilized reserve forces, and their deployment is often characterized by inadequate training and personal equipment. The Ministry of Defense intelligence update shows that the Kremlin is likely to be concerned that an increasing number of families are prepared to risk arrest in protest against the conditions their relatives faced in the war. Earlier, the Ministry of Defense said that Russian reservists were killed in large numbers in frontline attacks in Donetsk Oblast. In its most recent update, the Defense Ministry said, the mobilized reservists likely suffered particularly heavy losses after dedicating themselves to digging trenches while under artillery fire around the Luhansk Oblast, town of Svatov. Defense intelligence added that the suitability of Russian reservists was often questionable, and that the training and equipment provided to them was inadequate. As we read in the news, Putin is sending his soldiers to their deaths on purpose. Russian anti-war partisans started to take action again after the news. Russian war opponents argued that it was against human rights for Putin to force people into war. This was especially mentioned in the demonstrations held in Moscow yesterday. After Russian President Putin declared mobilization, tens of thousands of Russian citizens left the country, while anti-war demonstrations were held in many parts of the country. Over 1,000 people were detained. The human rights group OVD Info, which monitors political detention and arrest in Russia, reported that more than 1,311 people were detained until late in the evening, according to information gathered from 38 Russian cities. According to the information compiled, at least 502 people were detained in the capital Moscow. While this number was 524 in St. Petersburg, the second most populous city in Russia, there were attempts to carry out authorized actions in several regions that brought together an extremely small number of participants. All of these were stopped. The violators were detained and taken to the police station for investigation, said Irina Volk, official of the Russian Interior Ministry. The prosecutor's office in Moscow warned that calling and participating in illegal protests could be punishable by up to 15 years in prison. After Putin announced his decision to mobilize, the Vesna opposition movement called for protests. The Moscow prosecutor's office warned that organizing or participating in protests would result in up to 15 years in prison. Despite the warnings, the protesters, who took to the streets for anti-war protests on International Peace Day, chanted no to mobilization. One of the protesters, Vasily Fedorov, said, "Everyone is afraid. I'm for peace. I don't want to have to shoot. But it is too dangerous to come forward right now. There will be more people if it wasn't dangerous." 60-year-old Alexei, who did not want to give his last name, said, "I went out with the intention of participating in the protests, but it seems they have already detained everyone. This regime has cursed itself. It is destroying your youth." A young protesters shouted at a police officer, "Why are you serving a man who has been in power for 20 years, Putin?" So, what is this partial mobilization that angers the Russian people? We will inform you about the details of the partial mobilization. Russian President Vladimir Putin made a speech to a nation broadcast on all state channels on September 21, 2022, and made statements about the deployments in Ukraine, which was occupied by Russia, and announced that they had declared a partial military mobilization in the country, reminding that only contracted professional soldiers serve in the Donbas region in eastern Ukraine. Putin briefly spoke as follows: "I think that it is necessary to support the proposal of the Russian Ministry of Defense and the Russian General Staff for the declaration of partial mobilization in order to protect our country, its territorial integrity and sovereignty, to protect our citizens and people in the liberated areas. I signed the relevant decree. Only citizens who have a reservist status, and especially those who have served in the army with a certain military record and relevant experience, will be called up for military service. Those called up for military service will receive additional military training in line with their special military operation experience. The heads of defense industry enterprises are directly responsible for fulfilling the goals of increasing the production of weapons and military equipment, introducing additional production capacities. Thus, the reserve units of the army will be called to duty. Russians participating in the mobilization will have the status of soldiers. After this partial expedition, he left the Russian country with 1,000. One-way flights in Russia quickly sold out after Putin ordered the immediate recall of 300,000 reservists. According to Avia sales data, many Russian citizens bought tickets to Turkey and America, which do not impose sanctions. Direct flights from Moscow to Yerevan and Istanbul appeared to have run out on Wednesday. In addition, it was noted that additional flights were opened and the prices of flights to Istanbul via Kyrgyzstan were between $1,000 and $2,000. Their flights to Tbilisi are also sold out on Russian flight sites. Tourism companies announced that those who have purchased tour packages from Russians between the ages of 18 and 65 who are eligible for military service will be refunded after the costs are deducted. It was stated that those who bought scheduled flight tickets before September 21 will be fully refunded. Russian citizens residing in Antalya, on the other hand, noted that many of their relatives and acquaintances set out to come to Antalya, and that the most demanded cities were Antalya, Istanbul and Izmir. It has been announced that Russians are also turning to other countries and cities such as Dubai and Georgia besides Antalya. It was stated that those who could not find a place on the planes set off to come to Antalya with their vehicles by land. It was also noted that about 30 Russian citizens who came to Antalya on vacation or for business purposes cancelled their flights from Antalya airport and did not get on the plane. European Union officials, who thought that the real plan of the Russian state was different, held a meeting. European Union foreign ministers have decided to hold an emergency meeting in New York after Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered the mobilization of hundreds of thousands of Russian citizens to fight in Ukraine. It is clear that Russia wants to destroy Ukraine, said European Union High Representative Josep Borrell. Thank you for watching us.